Thanks everybody for coming out. I'm Tyler. This is Matt DesLauriers. Matt, for those of you who don't know, is another really amazing generative artist in the space. Matt, I remember being, one of the very first other artists working this way that I noticed, and immediately had a high level of respect for his work. And so I think we both have kind of had an interesting journey over the last 10-ish years making work this way. So I think we thought it'd be an interesting chance to kind of have an artist-artist dialogue, which doesn't happen that often. So hopefully it turns out well, and we'll see how it goes. But yeah, thanks for being out, and I'll let Matt take the first.
So yeah, I think one of the things that struck me when I was reading your book, which is here, of course, this is why we're here, I guess. But one of the things that struck me is that you got interested in generative art in around 2014.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was actually the year that I kind of pinpoint as my interest as well. That's where I deep dived into the subject. And before that, I don't think I even knew the term generative art.
Me either.
And so it's kind of funny that we both struck on generative art in the same year. And I think it was, over the course of a few years after that, I started following your blog, started following your writing, and of course your work as well. So it's very cool to be here, just chatting and
Agreed.
sort of switching, just like swapping ideas, I guess, and see where this conversation goes. But I wanted to ask, I just wanted to ask, how has your process changed since 2014? Because for me, it's really changed a lot, and how I think about generative art has changed a lot. I've learned a lot about the history as well that I didn't know at the time. So just in general, I guess maybe talk a bit about what was it like over the last 10 years or more, 11 years?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'd say the change has been massive. I think, for me going into generative art, I came from this background of like drawing and painting, and so first of all, like I didn't know how to make an image through programming. Like it's this kind of really bizarre challenge. You're like, well, how do you make a shape? I guess you pick some points and you fill in the shape, but how do you pick those points? And so I kind of grasped for like mathematical things that I knew, like sine waves and quadratic curves and stuff like that. But I think getting started at the beginning, I was very focused on how do you make one interesting image? When you're making a drawing, when you're making your painting, this is the goal. You just keep working and you make one interesting image. But I think the biggest development and shift over those 10 years is how I think about crafting one algorithm with more potential than just a single image, and sort of the scope of what that looks like. Is it how much variety is happening in that algorithm? Is it designed to be used for 1,000 images? Is it designed to be used for 50? Am I thinking about curating these images? Am I thinking about taking them just as they are immediately out from the algorithm? So I think that's been a really big shift for me. I also tend to view generativity now as like not so much a genre. I think early on I kind of thought like, this is generative art. It's a style. There's these like 20 artists that I know. We make generative art. It looks kind of like this. And now I view it much more as like a spectrum and kind of a component, a potential component of work that I think any artist can potentially use. It's more of a mindset and a spirit of like the artist being a little bit more hands-off, thinking a little bit more systematically, or kind of working through a process or a procedure rather than being so precise about exactly what happens with the production of the work. But yeah, how about you? What, like, has it been a similar path, or is there something else notable that you feel like has changed over 10 years for you?
For me, it's been a lot of shifting. I'd say the first few years was really just learning the tools and techniques, like you're saying, some of the math and how people create work with code and computation. And it was very code-based, I guess, and I got almost too far into the code and graphics programming side of things. And at times I started to feel like I was losing the more, I guess, concept and the artistic side of things. And in the last few years for me, I've been sort of trying to steer back towards that direction, I guess, focusing a little bit less on the programming side of things. It's still central to my own practice, but especially in the last couple of years with AI, I think it's really been shifting a little bit in the sense that I've always had this identity of like, I'm a programmer first,
Right.
but now it's kind of more the way I see generative art is, like you're saying, it's more of a process, more of a thinking of creating some system, some sort of machine that runs semi-autonomously with a bit of inputs, and sort of letting it run rather than being so focused on it being code-based or programmed by any kind of thing.
Something that, whenever I think about you, for whatever reason, something that kind of stands out to me is like, I think about you as being perhaps maybe very like tools oriented, or like you seem very focused on thinking about how you're developing tools from my outside perspective. Maybe that's incorrect, but I'm curious, like, how do you think about crafting tools versus creating art? Is there a division there, or how do you see the relationship between those two?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I feel like a lot of the contributions that I have as an artist is maybe going to be the software and the tools and some of the ideas that I contribute to this open source world. And this is kind of going back to like when I was just starting off in this space and I was inspired by your writing and things like that. I was also inspired by the idea of contributing back to this ecosystem. And I feel like generative art is really unique in that way, where a lot of the artists have been sharing the secrets kind of to their work and sharing how they do exactly, like how they actually came up with the image and how they, their techniques and their special tools that are unique to them, they end up sometimes giving it away for free, which I guess in 2021, when a lot of the generative art became quite commercial, there was a lot of pitfalls to that, where some of the artists were realizing that they had open sourced their work and it ended up being resold and things like that, and they weren't happy about it. But ultimately, I feel like a lot of the contribution in my art is actually the software and the tools, and it's a bit, I guess, different than the legacy of like a painter, where they might leave behind like a storehouse full of paintings. I'm hoping that I'm kind of leaving behind a storehouse of code and software and ideas and things, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit strange. Like, one analogy I kind of think of is it's kind of like inventing a musical instrument and then writing a score for that musical instrument. Like, you're both kind of creating the tool and figuring out a way to use it. And especially in your case, you'd like to make the tool available in some way for other folks to continue building on in the future.
Mm-hmm. Just to switch a little bit, I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on just painting and talking about the physical aspect, because I think that's something that's so central to your work, is the actual mark making by hand. Right. Whereas I find in my work, it's a little bit more like using a pen plotter or using the software itself or using something more digital. I don't think I have my patience yet to do something like what's behind you here. For those who aren't aware, this is individually, these dots and everything has been individually painted, and you said there was some 40,000 dots or something to this work. So there's a lot of labor in your work that doesn't exist in a lot of digital artists or generative artists' work. Just wondering if you talk about that. Yeah, for sure.
It's an interesting question. I think, as I mentioned, before I made digital art, I had this background in painting, and so on the one hand, I had a lot of familiarity with the medium. Like, I feel very comfortable with those tools. I feel comfortable, mixing paint and getting it the right kind of consistency and working with the paintbrush and all those sorts of things. They're not intimidating to me. And I think also that, for whatever reason, painting has had probably a bigger aesthetic influence on me than a lot of digital art. The list of painters that I feel like I've learned from and been inspired by is actually quite a bit larger than the list of digital artists that I feel the same way about. And so there's something there about the material that's really appealing to me. And I think maybe it comes down to a central kind of recurring theme in my work is this looking at like perfection versus imperfection, and just to say it simply, like the digital world tends to come out perfectly, like computers do everything with straight lines and even colors and rectangles, and working by hand, the analog world is like the complete opposite of that. It's so hard to do anything perfectly. And so I find it really interesting to kind of like cross the two worlds over, and to take, like a really rigidly, perfectly specified design, like an algorithm might give you, and then when you create it or execute it by hand, you introduce this like layer of error and imperfection and richness, and I don't know, it adds a whole like extra depth and complexity to it. And sometimes I'm interested in doing it like the opposite direction, like taking something from the hand and bring it into the algorithm. I think there's also, I don't know, I think maybe we can talk a little bit about one of the ongoing challenges for digital artists is this challenge of presentation, and to use the screen or not to use the screen, like the upsides and downsides of that. Working with painting is like one avenue for sort of addressing that, but yeah, kind of maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. Like, how do you feel about screens? It's like, maybe I don't think people would expect this to be maybe a controversial thing for a digital artist, but I'm curious how you feel.
I don't like screens, really.
Yeah.
No, it's I find that most of the time when you see digital art, you're seeing it on your phone or on your laptop or your computer. And so then to go into a gallery and see basically the exact same presentation but slightly larger feels like, well, I could have seen this at home, and it's no different of an experience. Whereas with a painting, the main difference is that if you're looking at a painting on your phone and then you go up and see it in person, you're having a much, much different experience. And so for me, when it comes to trying to display this work in sort of a space like this, I tend to gravitate more toward either inkjet or screen printing. So this is an inkjet print. I haven't gotten to the stage of drawing 40,000 dots by hand with a paintbrush, but maybe one day. But yeah, there's a real quality that you get from print that still, no matter how advanced these screens are getting, you're never getting this kind of level of detail in level of texture with just like slight, lifting of the ink, the pigment off the paper substrate, or even the texture of the paper. These all have these like really nice qualities. And it's funny, I think a lot of generative artists were sort of striving for this imperfection and this kind of these little analog errors and analog details, to the point that there's actually been a bit of, I don't know, controversy or discussions or debates within the generative art community about whether generative artists should be leaning into this and adding these kind of imperfections to our code. So for example, whether we should embrace a perfect circle because that's what the computer gives us, that's code, that's digital, that's software, or whether we should try and mess the circle up a little bit to make it look like it's been hand-drawn. And there's some artists that are on one side of that and some that are on the other. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on like simulating imperfection.
Yeah. It's a wonderful question, and I think like one that's fascinated me for years. And what's interesting is I think there's like very valid arguments to be made for both sides of that. I think on the one hand, the digital aesthetic, like you take it kind of purely as it comes from the computer and you embrace it, it does in some ways like lead to new territory, or at least you could say that it has led to new territory. Obviously, these digital artifacts are like not things that you find in the natural world. But I think for me, the reason why I don't typically go that aesthetic route is that I'm really like kind of blown away by the level of richness that you find in the analog world. So any little object that you look at, the arm of a chair, like the closer you look, the more things there are to observe and to appreciate, and that just leads to like fascinating, rich objects. And so I think sometimes I get a little bit frustrated with the way that kind of natively digital things come out simple, and so you see something, you look up close, and there's nothing new. There's no new information there. So I think primarily what I'm interested in is like adding information and richness and depth, so that from a distance you see one thing, from up close you see something else, and very close you see even more to appreciate. I do agree that a lot of artists have approached this from a perspective of kind of modeling or being inspired by the physical media that we see, pencil, crayon, pastel, paint. It's hard to do, but I think that probably the best path forward is like a uniquely digital way to add richness, but it's also really hard. Like all of our references mentally are these things like pencil and paint, and it's like, if you actually do anything that has like, little wobbly lines in it, people immediately think that looks like paint. It's like so ingrained into our perception. So it's actually kind of hard to escape those analog comparisons when you add richness and detail to the things you're creating. So it's like, I don't think that it's important for digital artists to try to make like a fake drawing or painting, but I find it fascinating to try to add the same level of richness that you find in a drawing or painting. Does that distinction make sense? And where do you come down on this debate?
Yeah, I sort of flip-flop. Sometimes I really appreciate the digital aesthetic and that some of the sort of digitally native ideas. So, during the boom with blockchain, there's a lot of like very interesting like blockchain-based work that's not even visual at all, kind of. And then there has also been tons of great like glitch art over the years and like pixel sorting and things like that. But I end up always gravitating, I think, more towards the sort of, I guess in my case, it's a bit simulating the errors of things like ink running out or catching an edge or something like that. Because for me, it goes towards this feeling of natural look and natural feel. And even when I try to embrace a solid straight line, I say, no, I need to just add a little bit of something to it, because
it just feels better.
Yeah. There's a bit of a harmony to it once you do that, and it's funny that a lot of digital artists kind of feel forced, I guess. But it's like you say, it's like ingrained in our psyche that like a straight line is too straight, and a wobbly line is made by hand, kind of.
Right, exactly.
There's some magic to it.
Even if it's not made it by hand at all. Right. Yeah. I'm going to jump backwards just for 1 second. The screen versus like print debate. I was going to say, since we are talking about books, this is actually like one of the reasons that I felt really excited to make a book. It's compared to an exhibition, for example, it's like the next best thing. As a digital artist, it's so frustrating to like see your work, to know that most people are experiencing your work only on their phone, for example, and to be able to get the color and the texture and the detail in the book, I've always found is really important. Matt also has a book, just so you know, a book of the Meridian collection, which is a beautiful book. How do you feel about art books? Like, why did you decide to make one, and like, what makes a good art book, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I completely agree. It's kind of a format that I think a lot of digital artists want to see their work in print, and a lot of digital artists want to see their work in all forms of printed media. And a book seems to make most sense for, I think, people like you and I, where we like to write. We like to spread the ideas of generative art and talk about generative art. And so when I did the Meridian collection, which is behind me, I always envisioned having a book that would collect all 1,000 outputs and also talk a bit about the technical details. This is something else I find to be, it's a part of generative art, I would say, where if you just look at an image that's been produced by code or computation or some algorithm or a system, it's hard to appreciate the work just by that single image. And the more you understand the system, the more you understand the rules and the parameters and the structure to it, often the more engaged you are, and the more you find it maybe a bit more interesting, maybe a bit more beautiful. Maybe at least that's how it is with me. Is like the more in depth I can understand somebody else's algorithm, the more I can appreciate it. And so the more I can explain that through not just 1,000 different images, but actually writing about it, showing sort of the process of creating this work, and maybe peeling back the layers so that you can see that like this image is constructed from a more basic topology and using some kind of technique like that. So yeah, for me it was kind of a no-brainer to make a book. It took about a year or more.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, so a book is a huge undertaking, and it's not just the writing, but it's like the small details, because you realize this is permanent and you can't change
the page numbers. What font are they? Where are they located? Do you have leading zeros or not?
Was there any lessons learned as you worked on this? This was your first book.
Have somebody that's helping you that's incredibly organized. Yeah, that's my kudos to Shannon, and kudos to the folks at Unit as well for everything they did to help make this book happen. It's a massive ordeal, but I think, yeah, every artist, it's just a dream to have your work captured and shown that way. So,
do you want to talk a little bit about the difference between the two books that you've got here?
I can quickly. I mean, I have a trade and collector's edition. The trade is designed to be accessible for anybody, a collector. If you're really interested in getting something a little bit special, it includes a few goodies. My favorite one, quickly, is there's a limited hand-numbered print in the back of the book, which I thought is cool. It's just a nice way to like give a little bit of extra art to somebody. So feel free to take a look at the table and take a look at the two a little bit. Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to throw out a question here that it's a bit buzzwordy, but I think we may as well approach AI, the elephant in the room. So how do you feel your practice, if at all, is being changed by AI? Because for me, it's something that's very present in my mind.
Yeah.
And it's something where I think programming and code is probably one of the first industries that's going to be completely overrun with AI. It's an industry where even programmers are embracing AI, even though it's kind of to our own demise in a way. So curious what you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge thorny subject, I guess. There's so many different directions you can look at it from. I mean, just to like clarify, to date in my own work, I don't use AI. Like everything's very hand coded, you could say. But personally, my personal opinion is like artists should be the very first ones to try and make things with new tooling. Like one of the ways that I think about my own work is, code and algorithms is like, these are the materials, the building structures that everything around us is being constructed out of. We spend all of our time on computers. And so it's really important for artists to be working with code and algorithms and exploring not just how can you build Amazon and Facebook with algorithms, but how can you, have beautiful human expression with those things. And so I very much have the same opinion about AI. I think that it would be a travesty if the only people using AI were the folks trying to sell us things or market things to us. And I think that actually having artists like embrace this is incredibly valuable. It tells us so much about the state of things. Like, for example, just by following the images that folks have created with AI over the last 5 years, you can immediately have a lot of insight into exactly how much they've progressed, what they're good at, and what they still have their limitations are, right? Like it's a huge means of information delivery. And I think artists can really capitalize on that and tell us something valuable about how society is going to change with these things. Like AI is not going away. So I think it's really, really important for artists to work with AI, and I would really encourage everybody here to have like an open mind about how that might take form, how that might provide new value to us, rather than just looking at it from a negative perspective. In terms of my own work, it's a good question. It's not one that I feel like I've really resolved. I think you know, maybe I'm like a little bit like old man, but I'm kind of like, I'm gonna stick to my tools. Like I learned how to code this way and work this way, and maybe I'll keep kind of doggedly working that way for a while longer. But it is an interesting thing, just as you say, like AI art is often grouped under the banner of generative art. It's sort of a generative art form. It's a very different kind of algorithm. You know, it's an algorithm the artist didn't handcraft, and so there's a pretty big difference there. But there's definitely a lot of overlap in the artistic practices as well. And so mostly I'd say that like I haven't consciously had it affect my artistic practice too much to date, but I've been watching with fascination from the sidelines, I think. But you and I talked a little bit, was it yesterday or a couple of days ago about this? For you, how is that answer shaping up?
For me, it's quite different, I'd say. So I have gone through like waves where I've been feeling like all of the skills that I've been developing as a programmer and as a coder are becoming redundant. But then I'm also, as I interact more and more with these systems and start to learn about their sort of, I guess, their boundaries, you really realize their limitations as well. And this is something where it's been kind of eye-opening, is seeing how, no matter how these continue to progress, and you know, every couple of years there's like a new wave of amazing new images or whatever that are being produced by these systems, there's also a lot of limitations that I'm realizing. They're not really able to do the kind of even the kind of work that was doing in like the first couple of years of generative work. They're able to produce kind of maybe like a weak imitation of a lot of generative art. But the other thing is they end up, if you really tried to get an AI system to produce generative art, you'd be spending hours and hours prompting it and tweaking it and changing it. And in the end, you're just kind of coding, but with an AI in a very like clunky way.
Right.
So this is where I'm like starting to feel a bit better about it, I guess.
Right.
And then in the last
more job security.
Yeah, but in the last few months, I've been also very fascinated by the sort of underlying technologies and the mathematics and sort of the tools themselves, and trying to understand from like the deepest level. Okay, if I go down to the bottom and sort of unpeel the scary math or whatever, can I break these systems and tweak them and change them for my own art? And this is one of the things I've realized is a lot of these image generators, at least, are quite poor at these kind of artworks, because these kind of artworks are more vector-based, I guess you could say, or mark-based. Like a lot of the work we're interested in is mark making. And a lot of the AI people right now, they're not making mark-making kind of image generators. They're making pixel image generators, which always look the same. They always look like images. And we're not really trying to, well, from what I understand, we're not trying to make images.
Right.
We're trying to make like different types of work, I guess.
Right.
And so this is something that's been kind of interesting for me, is realizing that there's this whole space that like none of the AI major players are even thinking about, which is mark making.
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
And so it feels very underdeveloped, which is like, okay, still safe.
Yeah. Maybe I can try to translate that for some of the audience who maybe didn't follow, or I'll just try to say it a different way. Like,
I'm a bit technical.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, the way that these two works sort of function underneath, they're not concerned about what is this pixel and that pixel and that pixel. Instead, there's like a conceptual framework that's happening, and it's organizing, you know, this field of marks and shapes and lines that are going to be drawn. And so our programs are very much thinking about those kinds of constructs, these like bigger compositional ideas and how they might unfold, whereas the AI tools that people have really seen today are really thinking on like a pixel level, like what's this pixel, and if it's that color, you know, what should the one right next to it be, and what should the one right next to it be? So they're not like, they don't have any of the conceptual framework. They're not thinking about independent, discrete sort of objects in there. I mean,
they're not thinking about color palettes as well, which is something I think that you and I and many other artists in our space really think about color and the relationships of color and the relationships of okay, I'm only going to stick with 8 colors for the entire work, or 12 colors, or whatever it might be, and how do those colors interact with each other? Whereas a lot of these AI systems are just like, this pixel is this color, this pixel is this color. They're not thinking about these kind of relationships.
Yeah.
Just to steer into color, maybe, but
Yeah.
this is another passion of mine, is color.
Okay.
So
Yeah. I wanted to talk color.
And it's something it's in all of your work, Tyler. It's like there's always
Except for this
beautiful.
one.
Yeah. So except for this one, there's always this like beautiful focus on color. I'm curious, is there a specific process that you go through in terms of thinking about color? Is it paint based, like pigment based, or is it?
Yeah. Color's always been for me a really like crucial part of the work. I think it's one of the most difficult areas of generative art to tackle. I think a lot of artists, it's a stumbling block for them. It's kind of interesting, like when you make a painting, the way you can deal with color is, you make this patch this color, and then you say, you kind of fiddle around, you're like, maybe if I do a little more red, I can kind of put it there. And if it doesn't work, let's say for doing acrylics, you can paint over it, change the color a bit. And so you can kind of like wiggle your way into a composition where all the colors work well. But with generative art, you lose a lot of control over placement of the colors. I'm sure like Meridian, you battled this a lot. You pick what you think is a nice palette of colors, and they can look amazing in one configuration, but then applied in a different configuration, they completely fall apart. And so a big struggle of generative art, and a lot of how I think about color, is not necessarily the specific colors that I'm choosing, but rather how they get placed and how they're grouped, how they're distributed, things like color blocking, like how do you get a big punchy region of green and a big punchy region of red and things like that. That's often how I found that the color is most effective, and it's just really hard to do that in a generative way because you have to think about these like compositional strategies for how you place the color, and sometimes I get into things like color regions and like, if this red is being used here, like what colors in the neighborhood might be available to use. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about color, and on the other hand, like a lot of it comes very intuitively. The way that I craft the color palettes, I've kind of like slowly built my favorites over the years. Like people will recognize the same like yellows and reds in a lot of my work. Like you can see them in Fidenza very easily. And then I'm just interested in like, just kind of, I don't know, I just intuitively try to build and add onto that palette, and you start to learn certain tricks like, you can use these like neutral colors like grays and tans and use those to kind of cancel out the effects from the really strong punchy colors. So it's a bit of taking these like intuitive things that I've learned over time and figuring out how to make them a little bit more systematic. But yeah, that's a lot about how I think about color. And I wasn't sure if I should ask you this question, but I was like, what do you think is harder, composition in generative art, composition or color? But maybe my answer now just already kind of hinted at the complexity of it's not so simple.
For me, I think composition is sometimes harder because, in a way, I guess I've seen a lot of different like types of compositions, because with generative art you have these constraints. I guess you're often working with geometric forms, and you're often working with a sort of finite amount of code that you can write yourself, kind of. So you can imagine certain types of compositions. Maybe one might be more grid-based, or one might be more like free-flowing kind of. And for me, it's hard to pin down a composition, because I'm always trying to sort of steer towards something that I haven't produced yet, or something that's a little bit different than what I've produced in the past. Whereas with color, I'm kind of comfortable like using the same colors. It's funny how like I'm sort of trying to do this like new composition each time, but with the same palettes sometimes. And it's kind of weird that digital artists, we get into these rhythms of using the same colors when there's like, in a digital art workflow, there's like, 16 millions and millions
Right.
and millions of colors, and you can just change a number and you've got a different color. But we're like, no, we're going to use these 16 colors for the rest of our life.
Right. Right. I already found them. Why would I do anything else? Yeah. Speaking of like, I found these 16 colors. I'm going to stick with them. I wanted to ask you a question about, I get this question, how long does it take to make one of these works? And it can be a tough question to answer. Maybe think about like a couple of your works, like how long can this take? Like how far back do some of the roots of some of your bigger works go?
I mean, 2014.
Yeah.
So, but basically it's, there's layers to this question. There's the simple answer, which is that a single sketch might take an evening, or it might take multiple months, like 4 months or something like that. But quite often I'm building on code that I've written and my own sort of tools and my own libraries that I have been developing since 2014, basically. And so I'll tend to sort of patch these together. It's almost like Lego, where you've got these like little blocks that you know about and you haven't shared with others or whatever, and it's kind of unique to your workflow, and you can patch those together, and that's what ends up being the final work. So it is something where it's this long process of building your tools and building your workflow to some final point. But sometimes it could be, it's funny how like I can sort of cycle through and produce work that I'm not quite happy with, and then all of a sudden in 5 minutes something clicks and it's like that's the thing to stick with. Yeah. It's a really like, I think a unique dynamic to code-based artwork is that in some ways it's really reusable, and so just like Matt, like I have snippets of code that I wrote in 2014 that I still use a decade later. And sometimes I've used them in, like literally 100 pieces of artwork, it's pretty cool. Like it's part of what helps define your style. It's part of what helps you like begin a new work. It kind of lowers the pressure of like the blank canvas a little bit. Like you don't have to reinvent the wheel from scratch every single time. But also I think about it a little bit like a painter. A painter doesn't start a painting and they're like, like how am I going to make these marks? Like they don't redecide everything about their work every time. They reuse a lot of the same strategies of, I like to use the palette knife like this. I like to use this brush in this way. I like to do, an underpainting this way and then build up the layers this way. And so the painter also doesn't reinvent the wheel every single time either. So there's a knowledge base that they also build, and so I kind of think about it a little bit as a little bit of a parallel there between the art forms. But with coding, it's like literally just like drop it in sometimes. But also I love what you said about you can be working on something that's it just looks awful, and then you change like literally one number in the program and it suddenly works. That's kind of the, people say it magically, like the collaboration with the machine, but you really are collaborating with the machine because you don't really know what you're going to get out of this system sometimes. It's random, and it's this chance and sort of mix of control and ceding that control to the machine. And it's kind of the beauty of generative art in the process. I'm not sure how long we're going to go for, but I have
I don't even know what the time is right now.
I was just going to sort of steer it back to this space, and I'm just kind of curious, like because this was 2023 you were here, or
yes.
You had a solo show here.
Right.
And I'm just curious, like how has the last couple of years been? Sort of, you've been very busy from what I've seen.
Yeah.
But and I've also, as you were mentioning to me yesterday, you've kind of been off Twitter, which is really interesting. Like you've sort of steered away from the social media aspect of all this, which is a really prevalent part, I think, of a lot of Web3, and a lot of this space is really around social media. So I'm just curious, like how have the last couple of years been?
Yeah, amazing. They've been amazing. I've really I've kind of always had like I don't know, conflicting feelings about social media. As an artist, especially today, it's the way that you often get your work out there. I know that there are people in this room that only found out about me because of Twitter or Instagram, and so very cognizant of that fact, but also it's this like double-edged sword for artists, and it's both like time-consuming and also just can take up so much like mental bandwidth. There's a lot of noise, you know. There's this question of, on the one hand, it can be really fun and interesting and informative to see the work that all the other artists in the space are doing, but at the same time, I kind of worry that like it might trap you in that same mental space a little bit. Like I don't know if this is the correct answer, but part of me feels like going off on your own for a while, not looking at what anybody else is doing, might actually help to lead to a more unique space. So I've kind of embraced that approach in the last couple of years, and it's been wonderful. I've just been in the studio, and I felt like I'm at a place now where I can take the time to do work that's like longer and deeper, and I'm not so worried about putting out new work every 2, 3, 6 months. So I have a lot of projects that are cooking that might take like 4 years total to unfold, and I think that's like probably the best work that I'll do. So to me, it feels really exciting, but it's a big change of pace from what a lot of people like see and expect in this like kind of world of social media, and especially in Web3. Like there's kind of this, I don't know, pull for artists to show up like every day and somehow like be present, and I find that so distracting and frustrating, and it's like, is my job to be an artist, or is my job to be like a Twitter user? And so I'd rather be an artist, and so that's kind of the path that I've picked. But what about you? We've talked a little bit. It feels like you're starting to lean in one kind of direction in this regard. Like, how are you feeling about?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not as well disciplined. I'm definitely checking Twitter and social media, but I've noticed in the last, I'd say the last few months, there's been a sort of shift, and maybe that's because of the sort of the landscape of well, it's not even called Twitter anymore. It's called X now.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. But yeah, it's that kind of shift maybe is making me feel a little bit disconnected from it, I guess. And it's like you say, the more you can go off into your own little hole or cave or studio or whatever you want to call it.
Hermit,
yeah.
like, right, yeah.
The more you can sort of deep dive into work, and there's something really special there. So it's, I'm not quite at the point of leaving Twitter for a year, but I'm hoping that you'll inspire me to do that. Yeah.
What, this could be related or could be not related. I'm curious. A lot of people think, being an artist is a dream job, and in many ways it is. Like, it was my dream for sure. Tell me, like, what's your very favorite part of being an artist? Like, what's the best moment that feels great to you? And then also, like, what's the part you really dislike the most?
I'd say the best is just actually seeing your work in person. For me, it's nice to see it, like, obviously on a screen in a way that I'm like, this is the final output and this is something I'm happy with. But as soon as you see it printed large, or as soon as you see it maybe projected, or whatever the output is, and
like,
you see
like
the
you
audience,
finally see the work in like the form it's meant to be in.
Yeah, and I guess for me, it ends up naturally in this, like, in a space setting. That's where I'm the most excited by it. Whether it's like a print on a wall, or even like in a book or interactive piece where the audience is engaging with it. I guess it's like the main thing there is actually the audience. Is like there's an audience seeing it, and if you're only seeing it on the screen, you lose that. You can't really see the audience seeing the work. So there's something really exciting about that, seeing the audience and seeing them engage with the work. Least exciting part is, I'd say one tricky thing is sometimes there is a pressure with, like, it's almost the pressure of the blank canvas of what is the next thing, and how do you continue to iterate and improve upon yourself. It is this pressure, I guess.
That's what makes the job hard, I think, right? That's the uniquely challenging aspect of it, is like, I kind of joke about it this way. I'm like, gosh, like, I've been working as an artist for however many years or decades. Like, I've been successful. You would think that it'd be like easy to make art at some point, but actually I feel like every new project is maybe harder than anything else you've ever done before. It's like it only gets harder as time goes on, and I don't know that there are many professions where that is the case. But if that's your least favorite part of the job, that's not too bad. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love it. I think we both are very happy being artists, and it's something that, well, it sounds like you've been wanting to be an artist all your life. Kind of, you studied art, and.
Well, yeah, just not formally, but maybe more informally. But my answer for least favorite, I just have to say, would be like accounting and taxes, because like you can't escape it. Yeah. Truth be told, I spend a significant amount of my time dealing with taxes and accounting, which is just so frustrating. So
that's gotten a lot worse with crypto, I would say. Yeah.
Want to open it up for some questions? Anybody in the audience have any questions for me or Matt? Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that applies in many ways. In case anybody couldn't hear, the question is kind of like, how do you know when to stop? How do you know when the work is done? One of my favorite things about working with code as a medium is there's like always an undo button, basically, and there's so many times when I've like, work on the algorithm, and I'm like, this is great. Let me just try making this one change, and if it looks awful, all I do is I just undo that and go right back to where I was. So it's kind of like there's almost this like tree of branches that you explore, and you only end up using one little tip from that, and there's all these other parts and pieces that didn't quite work out, or maybe that's actually one of those other branches is like the seed for a new work. You say this was the interesting path that I could have taken but didn't take now, and that's a great starting point for the next work.
Yeah, I would give a very similar answer. I like that that idea of a tree. It's very true. You have these different paths that you can go down, and eventually one path just sort of seems a bit more appealing, and you go down that one a bit more, but then you sort of start to think, I could have gone down that other path, but I'll save that for something else maybe, or you might even go back there. I would say for me, the one difference is that I end up knowing when a work is done when I'm like completely and utterly exhausted by it.
Yeah.
Because I've gone down as many paths as I could, and there's probably an infinite number of paths that I could continue to go down. Right. But at a certain point, you have to say, this is done for now, and next time I'll explore, maybe I'll bring some of this into the next system.
Yeah, I'd say like on this particular path, for me it's like I'm completely out of ideas for how to make it any better. Like I can't remove anything that's bad. I can't add anything new that's going to be an improvement. I've kind of exhausted everything on this branch. That's when it's the stopping point for me.
So Hey, I had a question about, you said it seems to be getting harder all the time. And I was wondering, like, it's funny because you said you can reuse code, you've got so much experience, like you've proven yourself. I was wondering, like, what is it that you think is getting harder, and how do you overcome it? How do you face it?
Yeah, that's a lovely question. I think what makes it harder, I think there's two things that contribute to that. I think one is, as an artist, you raise your own expectations for the quality of your work. Like you're unwilling to put out work that is like worse than what you've made before in some sense. Like, or maybe you know that you're capable of achieving a certain level of quality in terms of, I'll just say basic things like texture or color or composition. And so you sort of like refuse to put out anything that doesn't at least do as well as you know that you can do in those departments. And I think the other half that really ratchets up the difficulty is that you always try to look for something new to do and like a way to grow and not to just sort of repeat yourself or to retread ground that you've already covered. To do something new and to do it at the level of quality that you've like sort of set for yourself is a really tough combination And yes, it's I think it's those two things. What would you say?
Yeah, I agree. I think that kind of captures it very well. I'd also say, at least the way I work, when I got interested in around 2014, I started approaching this with a very technical mindset, and I was saying, okay, I'm going to use this algorithm or this piece of mathematics or this sort of construct to create this kind of composition. And then the next thing I would do is, okay, I'm going to do another artwork with this other algorithm and this other thing. And eventually it got to the point where I was, okay, this next artwork is going to be this next algorithm or this next mathematical idea. And each time it was almost like, well, I don't want to just stick with the same level of mathematics on each time. I want to learn more, and I want to basically improve my own skills within this kind of space. And so I would keep sort of, like you're saying, ratcheting up, like increasing the difficulty that you're giving yourself, to the point that now I'm learning, I guess, concepts that when I was in high school, I decided not to take mathematics because I'm like, I hate mathematics. And if I knew that now I was doing these kind of mathematics, that I would have just, what am I doing? But yeah, now it's like really I'm just trying to learn the next level up on each new work, and that ends up being quite difficult sometimes.
Yeah, one other thing that occurred to me as well is it's like one skill that I've kind of had to learn more recently is like not every work you make has to be the best work you've ever made too. Like, especially in terms of scope, like some of the projects like Meridian is 1,000 outputs, right? Fidenza is 1,000 outputs. Like, you know, I definitely had to tell myself, like, not every work has to be a 1,000 output algorithm, right? It is important to follow your artistic like needs, and sometimes that's not what is appealing to you, and you really want to make something that's like more small and intimate. And so in that way, it's like, in that sense, it's not necessarily harder, but it can be hard, like that can be a hard mental challenge to like allow yourself to shift gears as well. Great question. Which one? Yeah.
I was just curious, you both mentioned that you spent sort of around a year working on your books. Now when you look back on it, do you feel like the books were for you as an artist, or were they for the sort of collector community? I know often like when people write and give their even context about themselves or about their work, it can help sort of change your lens. And I was curious, sort of like cliche, if only your mom bought the book, would it be different?
You want to go first?
I think it was more, at least for Meridian, the book, it was more like, this is for my mom and her friends and things. More like, how can I bring the passion that I have for generative art to a wider audience? To the point that a lot of the essays in the book are just, what is generative art, and why, like, what's some of the historical underpinnings and like the context behind this. Before I even get into the artwork and the algorithm, I'm just talking about like the context and trying to place this work in a larger space. So for me, yeah, writing Meridian was really like, here's all the stuff that I've been really interested in the last like 10 years, and let me distill it into a book, and then also talk about Meridian. But yeah, the first few chapters are really more contextual. Yeah.
Which I think is wonderful, because like, even though this art form has grown in popularity a lot in the last 10 years, it's still relatively niche, and like there's still, I'm guessing a lot of people in the audience here today have like, heard about new aspects of this work that they didn't know existed. So I kind of had some similar motivation. Like, really what I would most hope for the book is that it gets into the hands of people who have never heard of generative art before. So I've really tried to make it accessible and enjoyable for anybody, like even just on a visual level, even if they don't read anything in there. Hopefully it doesn't feel like overwhelming. It feels very, very easy to crack open and enjoy. I also have I put a glossary in the back that defines what's an algorithm, what's generative art, And I literally thought about like, okay, if my mom read this, like, would she understand? Like, here's what a blockchain is, you know. So you can check it out. I invite y'all to. But is it also for myself? Like, probably to a certain extent. Yeah, you have to like yeah, it's just wonderful to like, I don't know, feel like you're able to take your work and put it together in one place. Like, it's the same reason that an exhibition is really special to an artist. It's like, it's a moment to stop working and to look at the other side of the coin and like focus on showing the work to other people, which I think honestly is just as important as making the work. And so it can feel sometimes as an artist like, gosh, is it really like worth the time to spend a year making the book rather than making some new art? But I think it is really important to also spend our time finding good ways to show the art to people. So it's a good question. I believe you had one before. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned like starting with a sketch. So I was wondering, is that like do you have an idea when you start? Is it a physical sketch? Do you have an idea of what you want it to look like, or are you like sketching equations and code and is it? I don't know. I'm just interested in like knowing, like having some kind of image in your head of what you want it to look like, but then it being generative.
You go first.
For me, it's not code. It's not like I'm writing equations and stuff. I wish I was that level, but no. I am thinking though about the system sometimes. So I'll usually do like a rough sketch. I like to do these little like thumbnails where I'll try and like fill a page with like dozens and dozens of thumbnail sketches. And usually it ends up being like variations on a theme. So for example, if it's like more like landscapey, I might do lots of sketches of landscapes, but very, very abstract. And then as I'm sketching it, start to imagine how this system would be constructed. So I'd start to be like, oh, if I place these points in this way, and then I set up this rule and this parameter, and then I introduce this mathy stuff, then maybe I can end up with this kind of composition or this kind of structure. And so that's where it sort of starts for me. But then very quickly I move to code, and I move to the digital tools. And so the sketching is just the very, very first seed, and then I quickly switch into code, and then I actually sketch with code. That's like something I talk about in my work, is sketching with code, and some other artists like Zach Lieberman talk about it as well, where you're just like iterating on an idea, and you're changing the code, and you're sort of just doodling around, and that's kind of another whole process to it, yeah.
Yeah, I would say a very similar thing. I'd say, actually at this point, I try to embrace not having a final image in mind when I get started. Like, I've kind of discovered that this like doodling around thing is really, that's the way that I discover the work and what it should be. At this point, I really, I just try to have a starting point for where to get started, and that could come from physically sketching. I do thumbnails as well. Sometimes the starting point can be like we talked about the branches not taken earlier. I can be like, okay, I'm gonna start with that branch. I don't know where it might fully lead, but or it might be like, okay, I'm gonna take this algorithm that I had before. What if I try combining it with something else? And so for me, it's like having this like sense of play and an open mind about where it can go is really important. And this starting point can come from so many different places: drawing by hand, playing with code, combining ideas, being inspired by somebody else's work. All those things can be an interesting starting point. Abigail?
Often with generative artists, they get a lot of references from history, such as like Frank Moore, Ellsworth Kelly, Saul Lewitt, which are extremely important. But oftentimes the viewers don't put too much on that framework and lens of viewing art. So like, how do you want to break free of that? Or how do you let them influence your work but maintain your artistry, especially as like generative art is growing? Like, where do you see it going beyond that and adding to those narratives?
Ooh, good question. You want to take a stab first, or should I go for it? Yeah, okay. Let me try and ask the question back, just to make sure I understand. So it's a bit of like, obviously there's this legacy of art out there, both generative artists and non-generative artists. How do you balance kind of between being influenced by them, learning from them, and also maybe growing beyond what they did, right? And like, how important is that aspect of it to the viewers, thinking in that framework? Yeah,
And generative art growing a new niche.
Right.
Beyond utilizing those names.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think like, you know, any artist, like you can't ignore the other work that came before you, whether it be painters or generative artists. And so whether you like it or not, you're having some sort of dialogue with those other artists. I think the history of like computer art is pretty interesting because it is about 50-ish years old now, 50 or 60, and it's grown so much in that time. But we're so lucky to have like completely different tools, and in some ways, like, it's so easy to go beyond the work that those early artists did. And so I'm in some ways like, yeah, I really appreciate everything they did, but also I think like we're at a very different, I don't know, point and moment in time. And I try, you know, I don't find myself thinking about them so much in terms of inspiring my other work. I'd say for me, more often that actually it's like looking at a non-generative artist and thinking about some systematic aspect of how they work, and that's more likely for me where I'm likely to draw inspiration from other artists. And yeah, that's a tough question. There's a lot that could be explored there.
I think for me, so sort of the link with the past is really interesting with the history of computer art and the history of generative art. So there's an artist, Manfred Moore. I mean, there's a number of artists that were doing beautiful work in the 60s and 70s with like mainframe computers. And it's kind of stunning when you look at some of their work and you compare it to today's work. There's some similarities, and there's sometimes where you'll, especially if it's something like a pen plotter artwork that's coming from today, it will sometimes look pretty much just like it does back in the 60s or 70s. And part of that, with somebody's work like Manfred Moore, it's not necessarily that a lot of today's artists are using, I mean, sometimes we are directly inspired, sometimes there is this, let's see if we can recreate the past. I think, again, Zach Lieberman has this course that does this with certain students doing this work, but for a lot of us, it's not just like trying to recreate the past, but the constraints that we're working with, we end up often naturally going down the same rabbit holes. And this, if we talk about this tree or this pathways, we sort of follow the same paths that somebody like Manfred Moore would be following because we're using code and we're using the same systems and the same ideas and the same constraints. It's just that we have a lot more pathways to choose from, like different colors, different tools, technologies. And I think one way that we maybe, this is maybe a slightly larger question, is maybe as generative art continues to explode and continues to become more accessible to more people through things like AI or just even things like P5.js, which is a library for making generative art, and it's very accessible, and it's become a great way to get interested, and it's sort of allowed many more people to get interested in the space. But as this continues to explode, are we eventually going to reach this the kind of the boundaries of this tree that we're talking about, and then how do we escape that boundary?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you look at like how many times has painting had to reinvent itself? Like where it looked like painting reached the end of what you could do with painting, only for people to discover there's an entirely new way to do it. I kind of feel like, yeah, generative art kind of has to go through a similar cycle, and I feel like there's already been maybe like 3 generations of artists kind of like feeling like fully exploring one type of way of making generative art, only to later discover there's an entirely different way to go about it.
Yeah, and a lot of it will, I think, come down to technology. As technology shifts, we'll suddenly have exposed to us a whole new tree to work with, kind of.
Yeah.
A whole new set of ideas. But yeah, that's an interesting question to try and answer.
I think there was one. Yeah.
And this is like, say, big generative art on the wall.
think my question is around generative art has become quite associated with the blockchain. As a collector of generative art, I find that gets in the way. I don't know what your opinion is of that, and can it somehow break free of that?
Yeah, so the question was, today maybe a lot of people associate generative art with the blockchain. Is that, like, how do we think about that? Is that problematic? Is that something we break free of? It's kind of interesting that me and Matt both got started well before, I wasn't following blockchain stuff at all until about 2021. So the first 7-ish years of working as a generative artist, it wasn't something that occurred to me. And I think I sold about 400 or 500 works before I used the blockchain at all. So for me, it's like, they're like two different axes, and they happen to have an interesting intersection. And especially in 2021, we saw this huge explosion of generative art being created via the blockchain, and it did actually allow for some very interesting new ways to create the work, to interact with collectors, and to make interactive work, and all sorts of different possibilities. So in many ways, I think it's been like a boon for generative art. Obviously, it's helped to get a lot more attention on the space. It's unlocked certain ways of creating generative art. But also, I think that generative art is something that existed before and will continue to kind of exist on its own. And I think that generativity can be applied to anything as simple as painting by hand. And so, hopefully people, I don't mind that people associate the two, but hopefully they're not limited by thinking that it's only something that's tied to that.
Yeah, I think it would be a shame if the association is too strong and people forget about maybe the history and how this has been around, since the 60s really, or even earlier. And that's kind of one of the great things, like you were saying, with the blockchain, with this boom that happened, is that a lot more people started to get interested in generative art. But it would be a shame if they only think of it as blockchain-based work, because there's certainly like a place for blockchain and generative art together, but there's also a lot of room to explore without blockchain. And I think one of the things we've sort of seen over the last couple of years is that even in the space of Web3 and blockchain, there's been a sort of shift, maybe, where it can't be just the same exact, here's another long-form algorithm, here's another long-form algorithm. It becomes, we kind of want to see other work and other types of work. And so it ends up being that a lot of the interesting work ends up actually using the blockchain as a medium, and as maybe using the contracts and using the unique aspects of the blockchain, like decentralization and things like that. But that's a whole different road. That's very different maybe than if you just wanted to make a generative system. You don't necessarily need to follow that road. So they do have this association, I think, in the sort of general public now, but I would hope that the association is not so strict, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe like one or two more?
Do you have any of your own works on the screens of your devices or on the walls of your houses?
Yeah. Do you go first?
I'm just trying to think. I don't think I have any screens on any walls or anything like that. We have mostly more prints, paintings, kind of things like that.
Of your own work or other artists' work? Or a mix?
We have a mix. Sometimes I have some work after exhibitions, and I'm like, well, I need to hang this somewhere, and it's my own work. But mostly it's not my work on the walls. But yeah, very little screens, I'd say. I'm much more interested in print and more of the tactility that you get from it. And I often imagine wouldn't it be amazing if there's this like screen that's like this perfect art display, but it's always a little bit, it never reaches the mark. The closest maybe is like e-ink, if you're trying to display like a pixel artwork and it's a very low color pixel artwork. It's a perfect display because you can unplug it and you can leave it on the wall unplugged and it will never change for I don't know how many years. It'll just stay permanent. And that's like a beautiful aspect of e-ink. But then if you tried to apply this kind of image to e-ink, it would look awful. So it doesn't really work with everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I've got, so to answer a couple aspects of it, I do have one screen that we showed digital artwork on in my house. So it's a Samsung Frame TV, which those are super nice because it's like the TV, but whenever you turn it off, it switches to a piece of digital art. And so often have like, yeah, just a miscellaneous different digital artists up there. I try not to have too much of my own work in my own house. I much prefer having the work of other artists, just because I already see my work so often. Like I need to see something else. But yeah, there's always like odd pieces here and there, or you know, if my wife likes a particular piece, I'll be like, okay, we can have that one up there. I like that one too. But yeah, I love collecting work personally, and so we have a big old store of work to put up on the walls in our place. Maybe one last question? Yeah.
Do you kind of feel like when you guys started exhibiting in like really amazing spaces, do you feel like your projects developed in another direction after that point? And like it can be both at a physical level as well as like the digital level in terms of maybe scale.
I mean, for me, it's been really eye-opening to. So I put on a couple exhibitions now in London. One was with Bright Moments some years back in Soho Square. We put together. It was a mix of some art on the walls, prints. I don't think there was any screens in the first room, and then the second room was more of an interactive, like a interactive exhibition where you'd sit down and you'd engage with an artwork that is like both software and also projected on the walls. And after that, I sort of really started to think about my work very differently because I was kind of thrust into this this whole space that if you're only ever creating work as an artist and you're never having to deal with like the display side and the exhibition side, there's a lot of things that you never have to think about in terms of how do you present this work. But after that point, I started to think much more in terms of how do I present, how is the work that I'm creating going to actually be like presented, and how can I continue to like develop that where I actually build work specifically to be presented as opposed to just building work on my own and eventually displaying it kind of thing. So it was a huge shift. And then after that, I did another exhibition. It was just like, it's been amazing to do that, to put together exhibitions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like I had a kind of a similar trajectory when I was getting started. You kind of think like, okay, you make the art and then whatever, you frame it or you print it or whatever. But over time, I've like the importance of presentation has grown more and more and more in my mind to the point where I'm like the presentation is part of the artwork. It really, really is, and like it deserves just as much care and respect as every other aspect of the artwork. And there are literally some works you can find in the museums. I can't think of a perfect example right now, but there are works where like the presentation is the work. That's the level of importance that it can have, and so yeah, really, really, I can't overstate like how much I've shifted in that direction. And yeah, you get to a space like Unit here, and there's all these like big white walls, and it's one thing to make work that looks good like in your little like studio room. It's another to like, you know, make a space like this look good. And it's amazing how like you can make a massive work and then you bring it in here and it doesn't look quite so huge. Like these paintings are enormous paintings. Like all of these are like serious things to make. And so yeah, you kind of get humbled a little bit by the scale that it takes to do a proper like gallery or museum exhibition as well. For sure, like this was, you know, one of the biggest works I had made at the time, and it's like medium sized for this space, so it's pretty wild. Yeah, great question, thanks. Cool, okay, I think we'll leave it there. So Thanks everybody so much for coming out. Thank you to Unit for hosting, and thank you Matt so much for joining me here. It's been a real pleasure. Yeah.